They say the Atlantic has a memory, that it hides things the dry land was never meant to hold. Out here, 800 miles from the nearest coast, lies a place that officially doesn't exist. The Black Rock, a jagged tooth of basalt rising from a graveyard of ships. At its summit stands a tower of iron and bone-white stone. But look closer. There is no lantern here. No glass to cast a light for the lost. Instead, there are the bell's massive bronze transducers that breathe a heavy, rhythmic pulse into the abyss. A heartbeat for a world that forgotten how to dream. Thomas has been the keeper of the silence for 30 years, 10,000 days of solitude. He knows every crack in the foundation, every groan of the steel when the tide turns. People in the ports call him a hermit, a ghost, or a fool. They don't understand that he isn't guarding the rock. He's guarding the door. His life is measured in 10-second intervals. Between each pulse there is a hollow space, a moment of pure dread where he wonders, what if the next one doesn't come? What if the machine tires? What if the thing below finally stops listening to our mechanical prayers? He is the last of a dying order, a soldier in a war that humanity has already forgotten its fighting. But today, the rhythm of the Atlantic is broken. A spark of white light on the horizon. A sound that doesn't belong here. The arrogant purr of a high-tech engine. A gilded cage on the water, bringing a man who believes that everything in this world is for sale. Even the silence itself. Her name was the Sovereign. $100 million of floating vanity, cutting through the ancient waves like a surgical knife. She didn't belong in these waters. She brought with her the smell of expensive perfume, French champagne, and the cold, hard stench of money that thinks it can buy the laws of nature. "I'm buying the archipelago, old man," Vane shouted over the roar of the surf. His voice was full of the casual cruelty of the powerful. "This rock is going to be the center of the world's most exclusive resort, and the first thing to go is this noisy, rusted scrap metal you call a home." Thomas didn't move. He didn't blink. He just watched the sun beginning its slow, bloody descent toward the horizon. "This tower doesn't shine for men, Mr. Vane," Thomas said, his voice a low rasp. "It sings for what lies beneath us. The frequency we generate is the only thing keeping the equilibrium. If you silence the bells, you don't just stop a noise. You open a door, and I promise you, you are not prepared for what is waiting on the other side. Leave, now, before the shadows get too long." Vane only laughed. It was the sound of a man who had never been told no. He signaled his engineers to board the tower. "Cut the power," he ordered. "I want silence, now." As the sun dipped below the edge of the world, staining the Atlantic in a hue of violent crimson, the great engine of the Black Rock gave one final shuddering gasp. And then, for the first time in 300 years, there was only the sound of the wind. True silence is not the absence of sound. It is a presence. It is a weight that presses against your eardrums until they ache. For 3 centuries, the Atlantic had been kept at bay by a frequency it hated. Now, for the first time, the ocean was listening to something else, something older, something that had been waiting in the dark for an invitation. Water didn't ripple, it curdled, like oil on a mirror. And then the offerings began to rise. Thousands upon thousands of deep-sea creatures, their bodies crushed by the sudden shift in pressure, surfacing like silver coins on a funeral shroud. They weren't killed by the sea. They were fleeing from what was coming up behind them. Victor Vane felt it first in his teeth, a vibration so low it was felt rather than heard. It was the sound of the abyss clearing its throat. His $1 million yacht, a marvel of human engineering, was suddenly nothing more than a toy in a bathtub. Something below had reached out, not with hands, but with gravity. The Sovereign began to spin, caught in a slow, invisible vortex. Thomas moved through the shadows of the tower like a part of the machinery. He didn't need light. He knew the shape of the fear that was filling the room. He grabbed Vane by the collar of his silk shirt, dragging him to the edge of the balcony. "Look at it," Thomas hissed, his breath smelling of old tobacco and salt. "The cage is open, you arrogant child. You wanted to own the silence? Well, listen closely. Because the silence is about to scream back." Then came the first impact, a sound like a wet mountain hitting a wall of glass. A massive bioluminescent limb, thick as a redwood tree and covered in ancient barnacles, slammed onto the deck of the yacht. The screams of the men were swallowed by a roar that didn't come from a throat, but from the crushing weight of the ocean itself. The gate was gone. The guest had arrived for dinner. Down, always down, leaving the world of silk and glass behind, descending into the iron bowels of the rock. The lighthouse was groaning, its foundations shifting under a weight no architect ever calculated. Above them, the sky was being devoured, but down here in the damp heat of the cellar, there was only the smell of grease and a century of stale air. But there she was, a behemoth of cast iron and brass, built in a time when men understood that some things must never stop. A diesel engine from 1924, cold and dead. Thomas shoved a massive steel crank into Vane's trembling hands. "Forget your stocks and your empires," Thomas roared. "Right now, the only currency that matters is your blood and your bone. Grab the handle. Grip it like you want to live." The first turn was like trying to move a mountain. The oil was thick as tar, the cylinders stubborn and frozen by the salt air. Outside, the guest was wrapping its cold, wet coils around the tower, squeezing the stone until it shrieked. Again, Thomas screamed, his face a mask of sweat and soot. "Think of everything you've stolen, Vane. Every life you've ruined. Put it all into the crank. One more turn, or the abyss claims us both." A spark, a gasp of black smoke. The beast was waking up. It coughed, spitting a cloud of soot that burned their lungs, but Thomas didn't let go. He adjusted the fuel mixture with the precision of a surgeon, his hands moving over the scalding pipes without a flinch. The room began to vibrate. a low-frequency hum that fought against the infrasound of the monster outside. A war of vibrations had begun. With a final violent shudder, the engine caught. The roar was deafening, a symphony of industrial power that shook the very atoms of the island. Thomas stood back, his skin glistening with sweat and oil, looking like a high priest of some forgotten machine god. The pulse was back. The heartbeat was returning. And now it was time to show the ocean that the cage still had its bars. The engine was only the beginning. Now the bells were ready to speak. Thomas threw the final lever and the black rock ceased to be an island. It became a weapon. A sonic lighthouse emitting a frequency so pure, so violent, that the very molecules of the water began to scream. It was a song composed by gods and executed by steam and iron. The guest didn't just hear the sound, it felt it as agony. To a creature born in the silent weight of the trenches, this pulse was a white-hot blade cutting through its mind. The bioluminescent glow faded into a sickly gray as it recoiled. The ocean itself seemed to boil, rejecting the nightmare that had tried to claim the surface. Human arrogance had opened the door, but human resonance was slamming it shut. Dawn arrived like a weary witness to a crime. The sovereign lay broken against the cliffs, $100 million wreck of chrome and vanity. Victor Vane sat on the cold stone, his empire reduced to the mud on his boots and the trembling in his hands. He looked at Thomas, not as a madman, but as a titan. He finally understood. Some things are not meant to be conquered. They are only meant to be endured. Take your money, Thomas said, his eyes fixed on the horizon. Use it to make sure no one ever finds this place again. Let the world believe the Black Rock is a myth. That is the price of your life. As the sun rose, the Atlantic looked innocent again, but Thomas knew better. He went back to his engine, patted the warm iron, and waited for the next 10 seconds. Because the silence is still down there, and it is always, always hungry.